Released in 1995 on the Sega CD, published by Sega, and developed by Clockwork Tortoise, The Adventures of Batman and Robin is a unique Batman game as the playable game is made up of only driving or flying. And it has the original voice actors from its source material reprising their roles for this release.
Where's your pretty boss?
It features what many have called the last episode of Batman the Animated Series, which was animated by TMS Entertainment Limited, which at the time is known by Tokyo Movie Shinsha, who have contributed to many memorable animated works including Lupin III, Animaniacs, DuckTales, Gummy Bears, and Akira. Clockwork Tortoise doesn't have much to their name, as the only games they have released are The Adventures of Batman and Robin for both the Sega Genesis and for the Sega CD. Made up of artists and designers from Malibu Interactive, who licensed material from Malibu Comics to turn into games. With this background in the comic industry, it was clear to see that their specialty would be in putting comic books to video games in a way that puts the fan first. After The Adventures of Batman and Robin, they had one Genesis game under development titled X-Women: The Sinister Virus, which is supposed to feature the female characters of the X-Men universe. The company then grew fragmented and fell apart, and the game was never finished. But discussing that could be reserved for a whole other video all in itself. When released on the Genesis, Batman and Robin follows a typical 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up type game that all the other Batman games were famous for being at that time, but also had some segments of Batman flying and fighting baddies in the air. But for the Sega CD release, much like Batman Returns, the game utilized driving courses that requires you to shoot enemies while dodging attacks, as well as impediments in the road. But unlike Batman Returns though, this game is entirely made up of driving the Batmobile and shooting enemies, or flying the Batwing and shooting enemies. Personally, my main complaint with this game is the fact that there were no elements of beat 'em up at all. I think the Batman Returns playstyle would have lent nicely to this as well. Since the game was one of the last to be developed for the Genesis, developers had figured out ways to rotate and tilt sprites in software. So the Sega CD didn't bring much innovation to the gameplay itself in this regard, as this was already established on the cartridge. However, the Sega CD brought a wealth of FMV cutscenes previously mentioned, and that was a major selling point of this particular release over any of its contemporaries, as it gave new cutscenes and a new story never before seen on television. Produced by Warner Bros. Animation and animated by TMS Entertainment Limited, featuring voice acting by Kevin Conroy, Lauren Lester, John Glover, Arlene Sorkin, Mark Hamill, Ron Perlman, and several others, all coming in for their original roles. In an interview with game artist Chris George, he stated that their main focus was to eke every last ounce of power from the Sega that they could, and most of that credit goes to lead programmer John O'Brien for his incredible ideas he would come up with, and everyone would then scramble to make that a reality. A fun anecdote, Chris also mentioned that Sega was in such dire straits and confusion at the time of development, when they would call to ask Clockwork about missed deadlines, Sega would inform them that they wouldn't get their checks until the deadline is met. Clockwork would then respond in turn that if there are no checks, there will be no work. And since Sega had invested so much time and finance in the game to begin with, they still went ahead and sent the checks every week. Chris stated that his fondest contribution to the game was the Cheshire Cat boss in the Genesis version, and from an artistic standpoint, he is most proud of that element. In an interview with Robert Hunter, née Hempel, he stated that he created the urban environments, whilst the computer levels were designed by Stephen Thompson and Noel Hines. Now, I don't have any nostalgia for this game at all, as I picked it up for the first time only a couple years ago at a used game shop, so unfortunately I have no personal anecdotes to share. But one thing is for sure, the game looks and sounds phenomenal. You cannot discuss this release without mentioning Bert Tresham's contributions to the soundtrack. As lead composer, the songs are well arranged, fit the material, and evoke an atmosphere that was not possible on any other release of this game. And Spencer Nilsson then created the soundscape for the animation segues. For those of you who are familiar with the Sega CD scoring, that name should be burned into your mind, as he was head composer for Echo the Dolphin, Echo the Tides of Time, Sonic CD, Cyber Speedway, as well as making countless contributions for many other soundtracks on that platform. So if you have a Sega CD or any of the avenues to emulate Sega CD games, do yourself a favor and check this out. It's not the greatest Batman game ever made, I'll give it that, but for the cutscenes it should be enjoyable if you are at all a fan of the animated series. The difficulty spikes do come out of nowhere, but the personal rewards for overcoming hurdles are hard to beat. Okay, so that wraps up the inaugural episode of Sega CD from A to Z. I don't know how often I'll be making these episodes, but I want to give kind of the same sort of dive into production anecdotes with this game and do this with the rest of the titles. I'm planning on doing all 150 North American releases. And since my channel is still unmonetized for the time being, we can consider this a video pro bono work for the community. Hopefully I can get that squared away. They said I can't even appeal it until October 27th. So I guess on October 27th, hopefully I should have all the copyrighted material taken off my channel, and I should be able to reappeal and get that taken care of. I guess that's all. Thanks for watching.